Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran and Duffy. We've got a fun show. We're here in Indianapolis, boots on the ground from Lucas Oil Stadium, really the Indiana Convention Center for the next couple of days before the action begins across the street at the stadium. But a lot of action here as media availability has begun. The quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends met with the media starting 8 a.m. Eastern this morning. Then every coach and general manager in the NFL met the media, including Doug Peterson, including Howie Roseman, who, by the way, is our guest this week on Mr. Relevant. I caught up with Howie Roseman at the top of the show. We talked all about the combine process, some changes here to the schedule, how that's going to impact the scouting department and the coaching staff here this week, and how maybe one of the Eagles coaches had some input into some of those changes. So we'll hit on that at the very top with Howie Roseman. After that, pick six. Chris McPherson and I are going to go through 6 takeaways from the Eagles media session. Yeah, we try and cover the full draft. We usually don't do too many Eagles-centric segments here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, but we're going to do that in that segment. 6 takeaways from Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson there in pick 6. After that, we're going to go to Draft Buzz, just some big takeaways, a lot of breaking news here today from the scouting combine covering the NFL draft, some guys that are not going to work out this week, so we'll cover some of that and some of the other takeaways and nuggets from the media availability, and after that, we'll answer one of your questions at home in our draft mailbag. Before we get the show started, I just want to give a quick reminder, if you haven't had a chance yet, go on PhiladelphiaEagles.com/journey survey. Help us out. Just take 3, 4, 5 minutes. It's all content-based. So all these questions are all trying to help us make this show better. You take that quick survey. People that did it over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, huge help for us moving forward. So if you're able to do that for this show, really appreciate it. If you can't go on PhiladelphiaEagles.com/journey survey, you can go onto my Twitter account at FDuffy3. You can go on to Chris McPherson, Ben Fennell, both of their Twitter pages. You can go on right on your phone to this podcast episode, scroll into the details, and you can see the link to the survey right there as well. So really appreciate anybody that has a couple minutes just to kind of help us out. All right, that being said, let's go now. Let's start the show off. It's time for Mr. Relevant.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome back to the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. Howie Roseman. Howie, welcome back to Indianapolis. Welcome back to the show.
Fran, I know you're as excited as anyone being in Indy right now. I know you're fired up for this week as we are as well.
So what are your thoughts? The whole schedule is kind of flopped on its head a little bit. How does that impact you guys moving into this week? And just kind of go through some of those changes and how it impacts you guys.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about the change.
Yeah.
I think at this point in time, my 20th combine, I feel like we got in such a routine. It was almost like Pavlov's dog.
Right.
Like we were classically conditioned. Like at this time we were doing this, and at some point maybe we were even just going through the motions and turning this on its head. For me personally, I am excited about it. I am excited about the change of scenery. I'm excited about the change of dynamics. I'm excited about the Deuce Staley drill that we got going on. So I'm excited to be here and really excited about the opportunity to improve our football team.
So I wanted to ask you about that. How does that happen? Like, he's been working with the backs on the field for a while. So
Right.
Is that like kind of his end to like kind of say, look, this is a drill I want to use? How does that happen?
Yeah, it goes through. There's a committee that it goes through, and they ask for as guys want to see different positions, guys want to see different drills, and he's a legend, man.
Sure.
He's a legend. We got him in our building. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So the interviews at night are now being during the day. Do you feel like that's going to change? Are these guys going to be a little bit different as opposed to being at the end of the day where they've gone through a full day's worth of grind? That'll be a little bit different for those guys when they come in?
No, I think that it's changed up, so their interviews aren't necessarily matched to when they're going out performing. But
Right.
I think for them, it goes into the game day schedule routine. They're not used to getting themselves ready to play at 9 in the morning to
Right.
go through this. So now it's like a night game for them, which they've all played. And for us, I know that it's normal for us at the 10:40 interview at night. You're kind of like, I'm ready to go.
Right.
I'm ready to go home. I've had a long day, and so I'm very, very excited about the change and to see how it works.
What's your favorite part of this week?
Besides eating a lot.
Sure, besides the shrimp cocktail.
I think just being in one place with everyone in the National Football League and seeing friends, and because a lot of times you see these people and it's during the game, it's before a game. You get a chance to catch up with people. You get a chance to think about the innovative ways to improve your football team. There's so much hope as this starts, and as you get to the owners' meetings and maybe see them a little bit more, but you're already past the first stage of the off season. So, everything is kind of on the table at this point, and you start trade discussions. So it's fun.
Yeah. Is it a lot of like when you is it just catching up? Like, hey, how's the family? Is it talking shop? Like, how are those interactions?
Both. It's both. There's got to be some foreplay. Is that okay to say foreplay?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah, I think so.
Foreplay. There's got to be foreplay. You can't get right down to it. You got to develop the relationships, and so even just on the walk over here, saw 3 or 4 GMs, including Joe Douglas.
Yep.
And everything's the same thing. Let's get together. Let's hang out for a couple minutes. And really, I would say that all of our trades since 2016 have really started with initial conversations here about needs and surplus.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that fans don't necessarily realize. They think all that stuff happens right when they happen. There's months that kind of lead into that.
Yeah, it's much easier to have conversations face-to-face and to do things and get creative face-to-face than it is over the phone.
So one of those topics I feel like a lot of people have been talking about and buzzing about in the league, out of the league, in the media, like positionless players, and the idea like all these guys have such versatile skill sets now, and just the way the game's being played. How do you kind of view that? Like, because it's just such an evolving league in that way.
Yeah, I love it, and we're so fortunate to have, obviously Coach Peterson on offense about looking at guys like that and looking at runners who can be split out and play receiver and getting receivers the ball in their hands, and at the same time defensively with Coach Schwartz and figuring out where the league is going and trying to get out in front of it a little bit. But it's also unique to find some of those guys, and some of the guys that I'm sure have been talked about probably won't be able to be smelled at 21. Right. So don't want to get too excited about those guys.
Sure, no question. And then you mentioned Joe. I wanted to ask you about Andy. What's it been like now over almost the last full calendar year working with Andy in his new role?
Well, really, it goes back to 16 and hiring Andy and knowing what kind of person he is first and foremost, and then how good he is at his job. And I think he's done a tremendous job stepping into big shoes, both literally and figuratively, in Joe Douglas. And the relationship Joe and I had was something that was very special, and I didn't take for granted. And now losing Andrew as well. And so Andy, I think, is as excited as any of us are about what we can do to try to improve the football team for this year and going forward. And can't wait to get started with him.
One of the last question I want to ask you is a topic I've been talking about with a couple people, since I've been here in Indy. Lessons learned, like as an early evaluator. Are there things that from like your early days that you kind of look back and you carry with you as you move forward, throughout your career, and you say, like, without giving away anything too secret, obviously, is there things that you kind of look back on?
Fran, I feel like it's so important as you continue to evolve. You got to continue to evolve, and to me, this is. And I hate to use this, but it's kind of on top of my mind. It's a Mamba mentality of like, how can you get better? Like, how can you do whatever you possibly can to improve so that we can go out and win another championship? And for that, you have to take an honest look at the things that you've done right, that you've done wrong, and the things that you can do different. And I'm constantly learning. I feel like I'm constantly trying to get better and trying to be the best I possibly can be. And I don't feel like I've learned everything in the least bit. I feel like I can continue to get better and learn from things. And I take that time in May, June, July. And really, even if I get a couple of days without the kids, or if I go with my wife away for a couple of days, to try to reflect and figure out things that we can do better. And I promise this to our fans, to our team, to our players, to our coaches. The day that stops going, I'm the wrong guy for the job.
That's what I had a quote in my office at Temple, my old job, where when you're through learning, you're through. And like that one, I always thought was a Coach Golden quote, and I've always kind of stuck with me.
Love it.
And I think that's part of the process that not a lot of people talk about. It's like we're always, whether it's position focused or like just general process, just trying to learn from everything is always a kind of a good philosophy to have for sure.
No doubt.
Howie, really appreciate the time here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Talk to you again soon. Best of luck the rest of this week.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.
Now it's time for Pick Six.
All right, C-Mac, the great stuff there from Howie, and the thing that we hit on at the very end is something that I find to be very interesting, is like the constant ability to evolve and learn and kind of self-scouting yourself. I try and do it as often as possible. Really good insight there from Howie, just getting a sense of what he does on a yearly basis to try and self-reflect. You have to.
You absolutely have to. It really can go to anyone in any industry.
Yeah.
Everything's always evolving. I mean, look at what we're doing here in Indianapolis with these daily podcasts. Like the way that the combine has been covered over the years has certainly evolved.
That's a good point.
So,
Yeah, I mean, you have to evolve.
Yeah, you have to change. So
yeah. I go back to I was just talking with somebody today about the stuff we used to do from here compared to what we do now. I mean, it's completely different.
Yeah.
As everything changes, you're always trying to improve. So great stuff there from Howie. So that'll transition us here now into pick 6 and 6 takeaways from the Eagles media session. And C-Mac, I'll let you kick things off here. What was the big takeaway?
That's so kind of you.
We can go either
Jeez.
from Doug Peterson, from Howie Roseman as a collective. What was your big takeaway?
Actually, before a little tangent, if you don't mind.
Okay, a little tangent. Yeah, let's hear it.
I have to thank you for the gift that you left me.
Of course.
Okay, so I unfortunately was not able to fly out until early this morning.
Yes.
So I missed the player media availability, which took place from 8 to 11 this morning. So I didn't get to hear from the quarterbacks and receivers. Fran has more insight into them. But when I arrived at the NovaCare complex, just to grab a few things before I head on to the airport, there was a huge binder waiting for me.
When he says huge, it was a huge binder.
It's really going to be a spectacle if I bring this out during the workout, okay? All right, this is one of those ones where you're supposed to put like years of medical records kind of attached to it. It
was the best binder I could find.
Best binder available.
Yes,
okay, we
exactly.
can go with that one right there.
BBA.
So, but very thorough. All the sheets of all the players participating, spaces to take notes, very, very thorough. So I appreciate it.
Course,
I
yes.
do appreciate it very much. So
at the end of the week last week, I was like, look, there's no way I'm going to watch all 330 plus guys that are here. I can either watch another guy or I can spend 90 minutes and put together some things that'll help us this week and make our week a little more efficient.
It's great.
I went that route.
So thank you for that.
Of course.
The first item that I will say here for pick 6 in big takeaways, and this really comes from both Howie and Doug, is that the team has not made a decision as to what to do with Jason Peters. Jason Peters is set to become an unrestricted free agent on March 18th when free agency begins. The new league year kicks off. And the Eagles did move up last year in the first round to select Andre Dillard to eventually take over at left tackle. And Dillard played well in spurts when he was thrust into action when Peters was sidelined during the season. He showed the promise that made him worth a first-round selection. However, the Eagles are not saying we're going to turn the page just yet.
Sure.
Doug Peterson was asked, "Do you want Jason Peters back?" And Doug is like, "Of course, I want everyone back." He's a coach, he loves all of his guys. He wants to bring back the team and Jason Peters played well last season. So the Eagles not coming here with any earth-shattering announcements as to with any of the roster moves that are going to have to come down the line here, but that's a pretty significant one as to what to do with Jason Peters. But certainly the team seems to be open to the idea of him returning at left tackle in 2020.
I guess was there a follow-up question there in terms of would he return as the starting left tackle or just return to the team? Like, I guess that would be the next question.
That was not phrased.
Yeah.
The one part that was phrased was that it would be left tackle.
Gotcha.
It's who's going to be your left tackle. And
Right,
I think
okay.
the way the questions were asked, I will say it may not have been specifically, is he coming back as your starting left tackle?
Exactly.
But it was basically who's coming back as your left tackle, and they were asked, is it going to be basically Jason or Andre? It's one or the other.
Right.
It's like yes. So I would take from that yes, they were talking about who would be the starting, but there has been discussion, could he play guard? Could he move around the line? It seems like it's going to be left tackle, and that'll be something to watch in the weeks ahead. But basically, I think Howie is saying, look, this is a guy who he believes will be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He deserves special deference. You are trying to do the best things to win, especially in 2020. and they still think that after the season that he had in 2019, that he can be part of a winning program here this year.
Well, to me, my big takeaway was from Howie on signing core guys, going into free agency. There's the outlook of this team going into free agency. And he said, look, it's not just for this year. This isn't going in and signing guys on one-year contracts or older who can come in and just make an impact for 2020. Over the last 2 seasons coming off the Super Bowl, we were looking at our team over the last few years, or over the next 3 years, we're looking at it differently now. We're looking at not just 2020, but 2021, 2022. So the door is open for going for younger guys who would be a little bit more higher price. And you go back, these guys weren't break-the-bank contracts, but you go back to Brandon Brooks, you go back to Rodney McLeod in 2016. Both those guys, Nigel Bradham, we would put into that bucket as well, as guys that they weren't just 1 year and done. It was, hey, we want this guy to be here for the next handful of seasons to help us try and win another Super Bowl. So I thought that was really cool, just kind of getting some insight, not just into, all right, this is the Eagles' plan for 2020 in the spring, but just the team building process in general, and that it's not just okay, this is our philosophy. It's an ever evolving thing that looking at where your team is at in terms of their status in the division and the conference. This is where we're at. This is our window. Okay, how are we going to attack this now? Because before, you had the quarterback on the rookie contract. Now you have to kind of look at things a little bit differently. That changes your philosophy and how you're building the team.
But I guess this kind of segues to my next point here in Pick 6, is that last year specifically, Howie Roseman said they did not want to go big in the free agency market because they knew they were going to have some big contracts that were coming off their books and the players who were going to be signed to big deals by other teams, and they wanted to get those compensatory picks in 2020. I look at guys like Nick Foles, like Jordan Hicks, like Golden Tate even. Those guys signed with other teams, and now the Eagles, it's not officially been announced as we're recording this podcast, but
Right.
It's expected in the days ahead here as we're at the NFL Scouting Combine that the Eagles will end up with 10 total draft picks thanks to those compensatory selections.
Including an extra third-round pick.
Yeah, including an extra third-round pick, which will be so huge because the Eagles have had 5 picks in each of the last 2 years. A lot of that was due to the Carson Wentz trade, but you got your quarterback.
Yep.
You are set with a quarterback who's playing at a high level, who's in the prime of his career. Now it's getting some of those supporting pieces to help him out. And you do need some guys on rookie contracts. That's the thing, is you had an older team. You had a veteran-laden team where you have the quarterback on the rookie contract. Okay, you can have some of those older contracts. Howie Roseman said at the end of the season, this team needs to get younger. Okay, they need to shed some age in the locker room. So to do that, you're going to need to bring in some young players, and they need to do well with these 10 draft picks. So my second point here was basically that the need to infuse youth and knowing that, look, it was worth it to get the quarterback. They won a Super Bowl in that window. So they did everything right. They've locked up the quarterback, which is huge considering you got the new CBA that potentially could be done, the impending contracts of some players coming down the line, Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, guys who are due to get huge deals. They got Carson Wentz locked up. They have their guy, but now it's to get some young pieces to build and grow around them.
Yeah, I think that is such an interesting part of the team building process. And when you say, all right, look, we're going into the spring, we've got 10 picks. Do all 10 of those picks turn into draft choices? Do you look at Hassan Ridgeway last year they only had 5 picks, but they traded that 7th round pick for Hassan Ridgeway, who became a 3rd or 4th defensive tackle for them. And you say, that's worth a 7th round pick. Yeah. I like that. So it's good. Look, there are lots of different ways that you can try and build your roster, in which, again, nice segue into my next point here, where Howie talked about, look, you're not going to force them. Both guys really talked about, you don't feel the need to force the issue at wide receiver. And I think, number one, this goes back to something they've done really well over the course of the last few seasons, is by the time they get to April, by the time they get to the draft, they can line up and play a game tomorrow. When I said tomorrow as in like a few months from now. But with who you have on your roster, you're not going into the weekend like the Houston Texans were a year ago, where everyone and their mother knew the Texans need a left tackle. Andre Dillard's fallen down. They're going to take Andre Dillard unless we move up. You don't want to be that predictable if you're the Eagles. So, you go in and you say, look, we're not going to force the issue, whether it's in free agency or whether it's through the draft. We're going to go through and we're going to take these guys as they come. And I think that, Howie Roseman brought up 2017 at the running back position. You go out, you acquire Jay Ajayi via trade. You go and you sign Corey Clement as an undrafted free agent. You acquire LeGarrette Blount as after June 1st free agent signing. So all these guys were addressed or acquired in different ways. It wasn't just first-round pick or high-price free agent signing. They're not going to just sign someone just for the sake of signing them because that's a position that they quote-unquote need.
I was going to say I was going to try to nimbly go into my final point here in pick 6.
Right.
The only thing that I guess would be a comparison is the fact that we're looking at the personnel staff.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Eagles have lost 2 high-level personnel executives to GM jobs in pretty much the last 8-9 months or so. You go back to Joe Douglas, which was post-draft, pretty late in the process last year, and then recently Andrew Berry went to become the general manager of the Cleveland Browns. So Howie Roseman said that they're not going to fill Andrew Berry's role. Instead, they're going to spread out some of the responsibilities to kind of develop some of the leaders that they have within the personnel ranks. But he did talk about bringing on guys like Connor Barwin and Brent Selleck and Darren Sproles. Connor Barwin's going to be the special assistant to Howie Roseman. Selleck and Sproles are going to be consultants on a personnel side, but they are here in Indianapolis. And
are both Darren Sproles and Brent Selleck are here?
Yes.
So nice.
Yes. So the big thing is going to be not only can they help, lend an eye with that player expertise, but these are guys who were trusted veteran leaders in the locker room. They know the right way to play the game. They know the right way to prepare. That's something that they can help the young guys and bringing them along. Because if you're going to have a younger locker room, you're going to lose some veteran experience.
Yep.
Okay? So if you need to make up for that, a great way to do it is by having guys in the building who have been there in their shoes and understand what they're going through to help guide them along in the process. So, and Howie actually said, talking about Connor Barwin specifically, when they came back from the Senior Bowl, Andy Weidel, who's now Howie's right-hand man, was just praising Connor for his work ethic, saying that he and Brent, they fit into the culture of the personnel department. They're just, putting their nose to the grind in terms of learning the business, learning the craft, understanding what it takes to do that. It's not something where they're just, it's not a showy title and there's no real responsibility. These guys are trying to learn the ins and outs of the profession and helping the Eagles along the way.
When you're talking about additions to the building, additions to the staff, Doug Peterson talked on the additions to the coaching staff.
Dang it! So, how did you get to that?
I got there. I got to my final point. Doug talked about, he talked about Rich Scangarello. He talked about Aaron Moorhead. He talked about guys on both sides of the ball and what they're going to bring to this Eagles team. I thought there were a lot of really cool nuggets in there. I will say he goes a little bit deeper on all these guys over on the Eagles Insider podcast this week with Dave Spadaro. So you want to make sure you're going subscribe to that. You can listen to these press conferences, by the way, over on the on our other podcast channel, On the Record. So you can go, if you're subscribed to that, you can go and listen back to both of these press conferences. But Doug talked about Rich Scangarello. He talked about Aaron Moorhead. He talked about really all those guys, Andrew Briner, Marquand Manuel. So all the additions to the staff, the guys that got promoted. He talked about Press Taylor and why he felt the need to give Press a little bit of a bump and have him be a little bit more involved with the week-to-week game plan. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what the process is in terms of building a game plan, what goes into that. Just because a coach was already on staff doesn't mean that he was heavily involved in all facets. So Doug obviously saw, hey, look, this is an opportunity. Let's give Press Taylor that ability to jump into this new role, have his fingers involved a little bit more in all facets of the weekly game plan. So it'll be fun to see, fun to watch. Press is a really bright young coach. Really, really excited.
They know that he is a coaching star in the making.
Yeah.
And they want to give him every opportunity to be able to flourish here. So it's a congratulations to him, and still it'd be great to see what he can do with an expanded role here. And he's still involved. That's the thing, is he's still the quarterback's coach. So it's not like he's being taken away from Carson Wentz and that great rapport that they've built over the last couple of seasons. So he's still going to be working in the quarterback's room. He'll just have a heavier hand in the game plan.
All right, well, let's put a ribbon on this segment for all the non-Eagles fans that are listening.
There we go.
That's our Eagles talk for the rest of this segment. Now we're going to transition to the next part of the show. It's time for Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, C-Max, so we saw a couple of different headlines here this week for the first day of media availability here on Tuesday from the Indiana or is the Indiana Convention Center? Indiana Convention, not the
Center.
Indianapolis Convention Center. The Indiana Convention Center. First, I want to hit on some news for guys that are working out this week. So we got word that Penn State wide receiver KJ Hamler, who I will say for my wide receiver for my cheat sheet for this week, he was going to be my workout warrior. I'm going to have to go and make some edits to that bad boy before it gets published on Thursday morning. He will not work out. He was my pick to rip up all drills in the combine. So I'll have to make some adjustments there.
That's what I was doing. I was editing that on the flight.
Yeah, so I got to make some adjustments on that one, so I'll send that over to you. So KJ Hamler will not work out due to a hamstring injury. He tweeted that during training. Brian Edwards put out on social media yesterday, the wide receiver from South Carolina, talented kid, big-bodied kid, pretty good route runner, broke his foot during training. So I talked to him today, asked him what's that rehab look like, and it's about 12 weeks or so. So you're talking a little bit later down the line here until he's ready to go. Chase Young made the decision that he will not work out. He's not doing anything on the field here from Indianapolis. Javon Kinlaw staying along the defensive line. Knee issue will not work out. So he pulled out of the Senior Bowl practice a little bit late due to I think it was a.
He started the week of practices, was dominant.
Yep. And a lot of people figured, all right, he's just, he's done enough.
He made
his money. But he will not work out here in Indy. And then Grant Delpit, the talented safety from LSU, will also not work out due to an injury. So a handful of guys that we'll see not take part in the on-field stuff. Look, not the most important part, as we've detailed over the last couple of weeks. The on-field stuff, it's important. It's got a role, obviously. But the medical, super, super important. The interviews, super, super important for those guys. They will be the big parts of their visit here to Indy. But a little disappointing from our standpoint, from a selfish standpoint, that we won't get to see these guys work out.
Hamler, I wanted to see fly.
Yeah.
Wanted to see him fly on the track. Certainly disappointing to see. And really, the question with him is not the speed. It was going to be the gauntlet. So that was
no question.
That's the thing that I think really that, we talked about what do we want to see. And if you go back to last week's show, our Combine preview show with Ben Fennell, we basically went through every position group and said, all right, give us a guy and what he needs to prove. Well, KJ Hamler came up as with the hands in the gauntlet. That's what you wanted to see. So we won't get to see it. Maybe we'll get to see it as pro day, but even then you probably won't really get to see. They don't do the gauntlet type.
They don't do the gauntlet there.
So just have to go off the tape.
Have to go off the tape. Well, one guy who is going to work out and is hoping to post some eye-popping numbers, Henry Ruggs, said today that he is hoping to break John Ross's record of 4.22 in the 40-yard dash. If you believe the spring timing numbers from last year, he's done it in the past. It's a little bit of a different story when you get out here to Indy and it's on the gun here, but he's a guy that can fly. So if anyone can do it, I'm sure he's one of those guys that can.
I know a lot of Eagles fans want him.
Yep.
A lot of people. He was mocked to a lot of the Eagles in a lot of mock drafts early in the process.
So he goes 4.2 flat.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
That's.
I think I can accept that.
Yeah.
That's going to be a tough one. That was one of the big statements, I guess, coming out of today's media session. Look, the player media, it's interesting. I think we've talked about this years past, how this process the Combine has changed a lot over the last few years. You certainly can speak to that because you've been coming here for so long. Even since I've been coming, my first one was 2013, where I was here in attendance for Indy. It's changed so much. And one of the things that's changed from our standpoint, from a media standpoint, is that it used to be that we would come into the media room, 9:30, and be here till 5:30, and players would just trickle in throughout the day, slow and steady, 2 or 3 guys at a time over the course of 8-9 hours. Now, those guys all come in within a 3-hour span and at 15-minute chunks at a time, half-hour chunks at a time, and you've got to get it's fast. You can't spend a ton of time with all these guys, or you're going to miss out on a bunch. So one of the things I typically try and do is, all right, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and ask rapid fire 2 or 3 questions that I want to get some answers to for most guys, and try and get as many of those as I can. So one of the things I like asking is, hey, who's the toughest guy? Not the most talented, not the most explosive, not the most, the biggest playmaker. Who is the toughest guy you faced in a game this year? I want to see if there's some carryover. Is there are there guys that show up multiple times? 2 players were answered 3, 4, 5 times.
Now, mind you, you were talking with quarterbacks, wide receivers,
and tight ends. Bradley and I, the pass rusher from Utah, a bunch of tight ends brought him up. Talked about just how violent he was and how technically sound he was, high motor, never stops coming. So Bradley and I came up a number of times. The one interesting one was C.J. Henderson.
Oh.
All right, so the talented corner from Florida, big fan of the way he played. I mean, he is so toolsy. He's long. He's explosive. He's fluid. Great change of direction. All of the athletic traits you want at that size, especially. Really impressive player. Everybody in the media knocks him for run defense and toughness. Can he play on the perimeter? He's competitive, man. I know it's tough sometimes you can't really put a finger on it, but I watched him. I'm he's got what it takes. He misses a couple tackles, but we're not talking about a guy who's soft and it doesn't really want to. So whenever those guys brought him up, I was like, all right, well, this is the narrative on him. What do you think about that? And they're all I know is that when I play against this guy in coverage, he's competing to shut me down every single time. He's in my hip pocket. He's trying to get the ball out late. Super competitive player. And I thought that was really fun, kind of an anecdote that I got from a number of guys. And that wasn't just SEC. I talked with guys from Florida State. I talked with guys that faced him in bowl games. So it was kind of an interesting nugget there on C.J. Henderson. So a guy that is in that first round mix. We'll say in the middle of round one.
Those are always the best questions, because there's so many media types here. Okay, because you have pretty much the beat reporters from every team here.
Yep.
You have team outlets like us. Pretty much every team outlet is here covering them. Then you get to some of the colleges.
Colleges are here. And then the national outlets, they got the draft sites, you got the blogs. There's
everything.
There's a lot of people here.
Everything. So you're trying to cut through some of the clutter because a lot of the players are asked things like, what did you used to be? What did you weigh in at? What was your height, weight?
Right. That's a good one. That's a good point.
That used to be every question, and it's all right. Well, that stuff's easily available. You can find that now.
I wonder if at some point if they will make the who interviewed with who available, because I'm 95% sure that all the teams know. So if all the teams know, why
What's
can't
the competitive secret?
There's no competitive secret. Let's just let everyone know, if only to let me not have to hear beat reporters for every market ask, oh, did you meet with so-and-so? How did it go? Because for every, one Ja'Kai Polite from last year where you get, that one answer where it was man, of course, of course these guys are going to say, yeah, it went really well. I thought I was impressed with Coach X and I'd be a great fit with player Y and Z. It drives me nuts, man, but it is what it is.
That's a horror story right there when you go to Ja'Kai Polite.
Yes, of course. And, of course, every agent, every trainer that worked with these guys leading up to this was don't do that.
Exactly.
So, of course, these guys are all ready for that line of questioning.
He was critical of the line of questioning from one of the teams. And that was too harsh, too negative.
Too harsh, yes, exactly right.
That was kind of the beef. And the reporters who were around him were they perked up when they heard it and he's complaining about the questions from a team.
It was blood in the water at that point.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, game over at that point.
And this was a guy who was considered late first round talent who dropped to the third round, who didn't even make it with the team.
I think it was three different teams this year.
As a rookie.
Yeah, as a rookie. I would say one of the big changes from a media availability standpoint, head coaches and GMs, again, in years past, that first day, they've always talked on this first day, but again, it would be spread out over the course of hours. Here, they crammed these guys in, 15-minute segments. I mean, 90% of the coaches and GMs that spoke within the first hour and a half, tops. So in the past, I've gone into those thinking I'll sit in on a bunch of guys. I love listening to GMs from around the league just talk and kind of, you get a couple interesting nuggets. But now it's so of course we didn't have this because Howie and Doug spoke a little bit later, so they were both mobbed. Howie and Doug were both mobbed.
Not as bad as I thought, though.
Yeah, I thought it would be a little bit worse.
It was actually really just the Philly contingent.
Well, that's why I was oh my, every national reporter is going to be there because even beats from other teams are going to be there because they're the only guys talking. But at any given point, it was all right, I like listening to Kevin Colbert from the Steelers and Thomas Dimitroff and Mike Mayock and all those guys are talking side by side by side, and it's well, I can't ask the line of questioning that I was planning on, but I did get a couple. I asked a couple guys about what I asked Howie about earlier, the self-scouting evaluate, your own evaluations. I thought I got some interesting answers. Nothing that I can do a piece on, but I talked with actually Dan Quinn about he said he was probably one of the more interesting ones. Was so what's a lesson you've learned? And he said, very early in my career.
This is from a coaching
yeah,
standpoint?
From a coaching standpoint. And it was about player evaluation and
Okay.
projecting guys to the NFL. And he's like, I was a very young coach when Dwight Freeney was coming out of Syracuse. And we had coaches I was in San Francisco at the time, and the coaches that we had, they had prototypes, for defensive linemen and what that position, that Leo position, we called it the elephant back then, what that looked like and what that felt like. And those guys were big, they were long, they were powerful, and he was like, Dwight Freeney didn't look like that, but he played like that. And he said, so we kind of learned from that. That was something where it's like, look, like, you don't want to have a team full of exceptions, but you can make exceptions if the guy absolutely makes up for it in other ways, and he's so special. And so I kind of followed up, and I was like, look, you've got a couple of those guys, on your team. You've got Deion Jones, you've got Grady Jarrett. Did that go into play? And he was like, yeah. And then I was in Seattle. I was defensive coordinator when we picked Russell Wilson. Like, he's another guy that kind of fits that mold. So I thought that was kind of interesting from a body type standpoint because, again, trying to get into my transition here, some of these the measurements are starting to come in. And so I kind of jotted down some measurements that I thought were interesting. But I thought, just putting a closing there, I thought that was a good little nugget there from Dan Quinn.
So, and that's the thing is you have to be able to learn to project.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to go through some of those missed opportunities or those failures. But the thing is, there's one Dwight Freeney.
Right.
How many comps of players have there been to Dwight Freeney over the years who didn't pan out?
Who didn't go, yes.
So that's the challenge of it.
Yeah, I think that, look, the body type stuff is important because I think I've talked about this in the past. All teams, like, that's a way for them to eliminate players off the board because that's what they're doing right now is that they're going to start the season with 2,000. We're on like a year ago now. Go back to May. We're going to have 2,000 players. There's a ton of players in the country that are trying to go into the NFL. So you're trying to narrow that from 2,000, 3,000 to 175, 225, 250, like 200. That's how many are going to be on your final board when you get to April. So you've got to do a lot of eliminating along the way. And so that's what the medical, the character, the football ability, the tape, all that stuff's going to eliminate. And so one way to help that is with these body types. And so real quickly, just some names I wrote down as I'm going through some of these measurements that have come in from.
Okay.
Really, it's been all offensive players so far. So every offensive player has gotten weighed and measured so far in Indianapolis. So the big one that everybody was making a big thing about, Joe Burrow, 9-inch hands. Here's all I'm going to say about the hand size thing. And this is actually how I feel about all of these measurements. It's not an issue until it's an issue. You know what I mean? Like, people say that about receivers too. Oh, he's got small hands. Like, that could lead to drops. Like, well, if he didn't have drops in college with those same small hands, then I'm not worried about him having drops in the NFL with those small hands.
Exactly.
If Joe Burrow had issues throwing the ball in inclement weather and didn't have good command of the ball when he had to drive it and like had fumbling issues and stuff like that, I would say okay, like that's a reason why he has those tiny hands. But with the way that he played, the way that other guys have played with those smaller hands, there was an article on ESPN today that was really interesting that really dove into and just kind of carved that whole narrative of small hands is bad.
Really?
Ripped it to shreds. But to me, that's how I look at it. It's not a problem unless it's a problem. Like, if it's a problem, then to me, like, if he had those issues, I'd feel very worried that he would ever be able to correct them because he would point to the hand size and say, like, all right, well, he obviously can't overcome that. But that's kind of how I feel about that.
There has to be a point, though, where the size does become an issue.
Like Kevin Davidson from Princeton has 8.25 inch, 8.25 it was hands. I mean, that's very, 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 very small. Like, very small.
Yeah.
Anyway, some of these other measurements here. Tua came in at just 217. He was like listed like 230. Keep in mind, he has not been working out at all.
Yeah.
So that was the number I saw. I was like, ooh, that's lower than what he was listed, but keep in mind that is why. So I wanted to make sure we threw that in there.
And Bama's typally pretty good.
Yes, with what those
measurements,
are, no question.
so.
Like Jerry Jeudy came in exactly how he was listed. A couple of those guys, Alabama typically don't fudge those numbers from a body type standpoint. Love getting confirmations on juniors because all we have are what we get from the school. So, 5'9", 192, and all we get is that. So getting some official numbers is always great. So just a couple of really interesting ones. KJ Hamler confirmed small. Okay, so under 5'9", 5085. 178. Very small.
Okay.
But we expected. We knew that he was
Yeah.
going to come in small. Justin, there were some interesting ones here. Justin Jefferson, listed by LSU at 185, came in at 202. Right? Jalen Rieger, listed 195 by TCU, came in at 206. And a rocked up 206. Like, he looked good standing up there at the podium. I thought he handled himself really well. Laviska Shenault, listed 6'2", 220.
Okay.
Came in 6'005, so under 6'1", 222. Like, just rocked up, man. Like, so
but almost 2 inches shorter.
But cut the 2 inches shorter, yeah. But like, still maintain that weight.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big boy, man. Like, to me, that goes back to like that Debo Samuel comparison in a big way. Donovan Peoples-Jones by Michigan, listed 190. Came in at 212, 22-pound difference. Like, so a bunch of those guys.
Were these like their freshman
No,
year?
there was a number.
Like,
I mean, unless I guess it's possible that there were numbers that I put, but I usually I'm pretty judicious about checking the bio whenever I go and watch the film of the guy. So I try and have updated numbers, but I thought that those were some interesting updates there from some of those receivers. Changes since the All-Star games. Justin Herbert put on 9 pounds since Mobile.
Okay.
Chase Claypool put on 9 pounds since Mobile, up over 230. So he answered some tight end questions today.
I was going to say, that's going back to the Senior Bowl. That was a big question. Why not? But all right.
No question.
So what, is he now open to being?
He said, he was like, look, like no matter what I play, like, you
What's the
know,
whole point
like,
of the Senior Bowl?
like, hey, if I'm a receiver, like, I can still line up in the wing and do those things. So the book is still out, I guess, as we wait for Chase Claypool to make that decision. Darius Anderson, Jet Anderson from TCU, up 13 pounds since Mobile, 195 to 208. Eno Benjamin, up 12 pounds from 195 to 207.
Jeez.
So those guys put on some
gotta go
LBs,
back.
man.
We got to go back and listen to a podcast about the combine.
Yeah. So like, you got they got those guys ready. And now, we'll see how quickly they ran to the bathroom after they weighed in, and because we know that there's some of that goes on. But those guys certainly put on some weight since the All-Star circuit. And then a couple other things really quickly. Brandon Ayuk came in 33.5-inch arms for a guy that's under 5'11".
Wow.
I think Jim Nagy put out there was like that's equivalent to like a 6'8" wingspan. Like a guy who's 6'8". Like, so you're talking about a guy who's long. Like, this guy's got pythons. Stephon Sullivan, 35 and 3/8 inch long arms. Like, that's the longest arms of any tight end in the last decade drafted. I mean, that's like crazy offensive tackle.
Jeez.
Like, Mekhi Becton came in stupid big, by the way. Like, I think he was at like 35 and 7/8, like 367. He is a large human being. And then the last one, Henry Ruggs, 10 and 1/8 inch hands. This guy never drops the football. He's got some issues, I think, finding the ball downfield, like when he's got to track it over his shoulder. But I think overall, like in terms of like ball hits his hands, like it's not going to the ground. It's not going to the ground. So Ruggs, that was a big measurement for him for sure. So. Interesting. Well, as some of those come through every day, I'll make sure I kind of squeeze them into the segment, and we'll kind of talk through it. But just some interesting numbers here over the first couple of days. That being said, let's wrap the show up. It's time for a draft mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
As the Indiana Convention Center falls apart around us, as you can hear the walls being taken down, and I don't know what they're setting up across from us. But just a quick reminder.
Are they expanding it?
Well, I don't know what's going on in front of us. We're like 10 feet away. The wall like disappeared. It was up, and now it's down, but it's being built back up again. Quick reminder, best way to support the show, go on to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment. 2 people have done so in the last few days. Tim Richard, 718, left a 5-star review. Great comment, C-Mac. This is great. Love the show. Just started listening this past season. I'm from Washington State, and I love being able to get all of the Eagles entertainment in these podcasts. You guys do an amazing job getting content to the fans and making us feel a little bit of a part of the team. It's incredible. No other team reaches their fans like the Eagles do. I love these shows, and this team can't get enough. So great comment there.
I wonder if he's a born and raised Eagles fan, or did he come on with Andre Dillard?
It's a good question.
Especially if he just started listening to podcasts in last season.
Yeah, from Washington. That's a good point. That's a good call. And then lastly, we have a question from Richard in Charleston, South Carolina. Left a 5-star review. With so much that goes into the selection of players in the draft and free agency, do teams ever consider their divisional opponents in the selection process? As an example, would they select a rangy linebacker with great coverage skills who can match up against a division rival's tight end?
I think they certainly are aware of what their division rivals have, and
Yep.
and I know Howie likes to do this. He likes to study the Final Four teams
Yep.
and how they're constructed every year, but it changes on such a year-to-year basis that you have to focus on building your team. You can't just say we're going to get a cornerback just because we know we have to contend with all these different wide receivers in the division per se. You want to get a corner because you want the best corner out there, period. It doesn't have to.
I will say that I would venture to guess, just from talking with people, that 3/4 of the maybe more. I wouldn't shock me if all of them have the depth charts of their division opponents up on their wall in their office. I think that especially when like a new GM gets hired and like if there's like a guy gets fired and you're brought in, the team's not good, they're at the bottom of the division. First thing you say, like, all right, the first thing we have to do is to win our division to get into the playoffs. To get where we want to go, we have to win our division. I think that they are always aware, and it's actually funny. Mike Mack was talking about it a little bit today. Talking about positionless players. I asked Howie a little bit about that earlier as well. Talking about positionless players and where the game's going and things like that. And he said, "Look, this is Mike Mack now." You see, look at the tight ends in our division. And he's referring to Travis Kelce. He's returning to Hunter Henry. The Denver Broncos selected Noah Fant. Obviously, he's got one in Darren Waller as well. But you see, you look at the tight ends in our division. Like, they're big, they're long, and they can run. Defenses have to look and say, like, okay, who do we have that's big and long and can run with these guys if we're going to play man-to-man? I think you do kind of have to take that into account. And I think when you look at, the Eagles, and people talk about Jim Schwartz and his infatuation with stopping the run. Yeah, you got Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, and if Darius Geis can stay healthy, you got those guys on the schedule, 6 games a year. You better be able to stop the run. Like, I think that's a big part of. Look, if you're going to win the division every year, you've got to be able to beat those teams. That's 6 of your games. You have to be able to win those games. So I agree with you in that it's not going to be everything, but it's definitely taken into account. I think to answer Richard's question, it's definitely brought in. It's just not going to determine decisions solely based off that. Going to your point. So I think that was a good question there from Richard. Again, best way to support the show, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. Again, really appreciate anybody that gets a chance to go on to that survey, www.philadelphiaeagles.com/journey survey. You can do it right here on your phone on the podcast episode. You can go right into the show notes, the show description. It should be there, the link to the show. I have been tweeting out pretty consistently as well at FDuffy3, at CMAC Eagles, at Ben Fennell _NFL. So you can go check out all of our Twitter pages, and we put the survey link out on there as well. That being said, that'll do it. We've got another show here tomorrow. We're going to catch up we got a big guest here coming up on the show. We're excited about that. We're going to kind of preview what we're going to see over the next few days. And then as drills begin Thursday night, we're going to have episodes every day where we're kind of recapping what we saw. So hopefully, even if you're not listening every day, you can kind of binge everything at the end and really take in all of our takeaways here from the Scouting Combine. That being said, that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Journey of the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. For Chris McPherson, I am Fran Duffy. We will talk to you tomorrow.